Good evening, everybody. Tonight, Making the Day is going to complete our study of the 27th verse of the 9th chapter of the Megillah. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge our sponsors, Iris and Les Friedman, who are dedicating the class in honor of Iris's father's yahrzeit, which is recently observed. Yitzchak ben David is the Neshama shel Avin Aliyah, and may he have nachas and high from the Torah that we learn around the world below. So, here is the little disclaimer. Everything we're going to learn tonight is a continuation of what we learned in the previous episode. Having said that, much of this is standalone. And as such, if you're just joining us now, you will understand. But if you want to understand more, you have to go back and watch the original episode. So, in the previous episode, take 2, we began to explain the verse on a very literal level. And then we uncovered all kinds of additional layers. And we discovered that what seems to be a benign verse merely describing the acceptance of the holiday of Purim by the Jewish people at the time is actually a very deep and profound commentary as to the story of Purim itself, both the subtext of the story as well as the subtext of the holiday. And I'm going to begin with a refresher, not of the literal meaning of this verse, which opens with the words Kimu v'kiblu, or Kimu v'kibel it's written, but it said we read it v'kiblu, HaYehudim, the Jewish people, affirmed and accepted, Aleim, upon them, v'al zaram, v'al kol hanilvim aleim. All of this was explained in great detail in the previous episode. They accepted it. They accepted it for their future, for the children that would be born, for those who would someday convert and join the Jewish people. And we're up to the words, v'lo ya'avor, and this shall not pass away, or it shall not pass on. What precisely does that mean? How does a day pass away? Sounds like a person dying. That doesn't really make any sense. But before we get to the meaning of v'lo ya'avor, because, truth be told, once you understand the verse in a deeper way, even the literal meaning of the continuation of the verse becomes more meaningful. And I would pose it that in order to understand the literal meaning of the second half of verse 27, you have to understand the deeper meaning of the first half. The opening part will simply not be sufficient. Just as it wasn't sufficient to understand really how could you accept something for your children? How could you accept something for people who will someday join the Jewish people? You can only accept things for yourself. None of us can make decisions for tomorrow. You can't make decisions for 100 years from now. You certainly can't make decisions for 1,000 years from now or 2,000 years from now. And this is over 2,000 years later. And of course, we're still celebrating Purim. So how does that work? So one of the two very important salient points where the Talmud, the sages in the Talmud, expound this verse and kind of open it up so we have a better appreciation of it. I'll begin with a refresher from the words of the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Peches. This is called the Sugya of Matan Torah, the topic that discusses the giving of the Torah. In the middle of side A of page 88, the Gemara says that it is written that the Jewish people gathered betachtit ahar, literally beneath the mountain. It sounds like really at the foot of the mountain, but it sounds like beneath the mountain. And we talked about this in the previous episode. I'm not going to elaborate on it now, how we learn what the drasha precisely is. But there's a drasha, there's a homily, there's an element of that verse which is not clearly understood and essentially is begging for a deeper explanation. Omer Rabbi Avdimi bar Chama, Rabbi Avdimi, the son of Chama, the son of Chasa, taught Melamed. This comes to instruct or teach us Shakafa HaKadosh Baruch Hu Aleim Es Har Kegigis, that God held the mountain over their heads like a barrel. And he said, here, Imatem Mekablu Matayra, if you're going to accept my Torah, that's good, Mutav, that's fine. But in love, if not, the mountain's coming down. And you're going to have this grand, big grave, mass grave. And it's going to be holy. We'll say, here lies the nation of Israel. This mountain will be your tombstone. So that's your decision. You can either choose to accept the Torah, or you can choose to have burial right here, all of you together. So what would you say?
I'll take it.
Well, I'll take 2. They got 2 luchot. So they said, of course, now that you explained it to us, so of course we're going to accept your Torah. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, this is a bit of a problem. He says, Mikan Meidor Rabba L'Eraisa. Here's the great big disclaimer for the Torah. A disclaimer? What kind of disclaimer? like a buyer's remorse. So he says, Im yazminum ledin, if we'll be taken to stand in front of the judge someday and have the book thrown at us, and the judge will say, Lekiyamtem, mashakibaltem alechem, hey, we had a deal. You accepted this upon yourself. You didn't keep it. We're going to say, well, we didn't exactly accept this. We kind of accepted it, but not that you gave us much of a choice. So it seems we would be like exonerated from being prosecuted for not following the rules of the Torah. And Rava said, although this is true, there's an element of truth to this, but what you have to know is that Afal Pikein, Hador, Kibluha, B'yimei Achashverosh. In the end, the Jewish people did make the choice willingly. And that was in the days of the king Achashverosh and the story of the Megillah. And this is the meaning of Kimu, the Kiblu HaYehudim, the Jewish people affirmed and accepted. Kimu, they affirmed, Masha Kiblu Kvar, what they had already accepted. In other words, this now fits into the sweep, or I should say, the grandiose panorama of Jewish history. And in the sweep of history, it begins with Matan Torah, and the Jewish people accept the Torah under some duress. However, there was no duress later on. And we had an easy way out. They say, no, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this. Okay, I'm out of here, you're out of here. And we had the option. I mean, Haman wanted to kill Jewish people. If we behaved like Phoenicians, then we wouldn't be killed. It wasn't exactly, Hitler who was looking for your great-grandmother to see if she was Jewish, or your great-grandfather, and calling people Mishlings and finding Jewish blood and going after them. Haman said, as long as we have no Jewish people left, that's fine. I don't care how we get rid of them, as long as there's no Jewish people left. And if everybody wants to forswear being Jewish. But the amazing thing was, not a single person did that. So this is very meaningful, therefore, and the Gemara sees the events of Purim, B'yimei Achashverosh. What does it mean in the days of Achashverosh? It doesn't say Gzerat Achashverosh. It doesn't say the decree. Rashi explains that this means Me'ahavat Hanes, from the love or the feelings that were engendered by virtue of the miracle that we saw, that was done. We reciprocated and we accepted this upon ourselves. That's what the Gemara says. Now, there's a whole lot to say about this Gemara. It's not a simple Gemara, beginning with the Tosfos, who asked the question, say what? Holding a barrel over their heads? What are you talking about? I mean, didn't we read in the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu came and offered the Torah to the Jewish people and they said, Nasa v'nishma? We're in. We'll do whatever you want. Well, we were happy to learn, but first and foremost, we're prepared to obey. So the Tosfos struggles with this, and the Tosfos says, yes, it's true that they said Nasa v'nishma. They did agree. They were ready, but then later on, it wasn't quite that simple. And they started to realize that this is a lot more serious than they realized and more than they bargained for. And they started getting second thoughts. And the truth is that even though they had agreed, the agreement was, like the bride getting cold feet. Did she agree to get married? Yes. Is she wearing a wedding gown? Yes. Does she want to run away right now? Yes, she does. Okay, so, he comes and Prince Charming sweeps her off her feet. So God swept us off her feet. And I talked about this in the previous episode. This does not have to be understood in literal fashion because it's not a verse, it's not a pasuk. Psukim, verses in the scripture, have to be understood literally, as Sadi Gaon says, that anybody who says that a single verse of the Torah is to be disconstrued from its literal meaning is an apikoros, is a heretic. That's heresy as far as we're concerned. Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. The verse cannot be taken from its literal meaning. But this is not a verse. This is a medrash. This is a teaching that can be allegory and euphemism and metaphor. And the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah suggests, in fact, that it is exactly that. Kof aleim har kigigas is a euphemism for God overwhelming us with a great deal of love, and He attracted us with a force that was larger than life. And so we were like overwhelmed. I said, wow, this is amazing. Yes, we're in. Of course we're going to do this, but had God not shown us that kind of love, maybe we wouldn't have said yes. Maybe we would have said they had second thoughts. So this is generally speaking what the way the Tosfos explains it. And the Khatam Sofer adds something very interesting. He says that in addition to this concept of we didn't realize how serious this was. He says there was also this business of when they received the Torah, it says that their souls expired. Like it was a very, very uncomfortable experience. Thank God I haven't died and come back, but apparently it's not so comfortable to die and come back. And they died and came back and died and came back. And I said, this is crazy stuff. Like, this is really serious. We're not sure we can handle this. So the Khatam Sofer says that would be another reason for them to get cold feet. And the truth is, if you look carefully at the words of the Torah, the Jewish people said to Moshe Rabbeinu exactly this, as is documented in the repetition of the events at Sinai in Parshat V'etchanan. They said to Moshe, Lama namut ki to'achleinu ha'esh hagdola azot. Why should we die? This fire is going to consume us. It's nuclear. It's too intense. So that's the business of Kafaleim Hakigigas. They saw the fires. They saw the intensity. They wanted to run away. Another interesting point to add is that the Medrash Tanchuma teaches us that the Jewish people at the time had accepted upon themselves the scripture, the actual Tanakh, but they didn't know about the oral Torah. So in the oral Torah, every word turns into 50 pages. They said, 1 second, we said we'll do some mitzvahs, but this turns into tens of thousands of halachot. We didn't bargain for this. So that was kind of the cold feet. And then there are other nuances added insofar as the business of having accepted upon themselves later is that the truth is that the Jewish people wanted to do this, and then they were like not so sure about it, and this kind of sealed the deal. It kind of pushed things along. Again, they weren't 100% sure. They said, yeah, we like it, but I'm not sure if we like it. And so the question then is, was that really sincere? And that's how we view the story of Purim. Now, of course, this gives us a whole new perspective of Purim. Purim is not simply a time when we were threatened with genocide and then God saved us. Purim is the time that Jewish history kind of comes to fruition. It's like when we reach maturation, and now we are all grown up. Now we have accepted this upon ourselves, and now we're in, because we had an opportunity to check out, and we didn't check out. We stayed with this, and that's real. That's very powerful. You know, this is just a metaphor. It's not to be taken as a literal frame. But I'll tell you something interesting. If a child converts to Judaism, I'm not talking about a baby, like even a child who's like 10 or 11 years old, his parents convert. Let's say the whole family gets all involved and get all excited about it, and they want to convert, and they want to be Jewish. And the child converts, and he knows what he's doing. He's 11 years old, right? He's a big boy. At his bar mitzvah, he has a chance to opt out. He has a chance to opt out. Or she at her bat mitzvah has a chance to opt out. And over the years, I've had this strange experience of sitting down with a young person in my office and saying to he or she, you know, this is the situation, and you were brought into the fold of Judaism by your parents. You can walk away from this now. You don't have to say yes, because yes was said for you. There was like maybe pressure that was put on you by your parents. Your family's doing something, but now you're going to be a major. So you have an opportunity now. You get one chance at this. And I have to tell you that I've every time I went into these meetings, had a good deal of trepidation. Because if the kid says, I'm out of here, like I'm not stupid, I know what this is. I've been going to a Jewish school. I know exactly what you expect from me. No, I'm not doing this. I'm keep 7 Noachide laws, that's good enough for me. If they say that, like, you know, the parents are stuck. So, you know, Rabbi Shachar once told me, he says, you always do it at the time of the bar mitzvah. The bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, the kids are still excited about it. He said, if you wait till they're 16, you might get into very big trouble. Just do it when they're bar mitzvah. I have to tell you, Baruch Hashem, so far, there's never been a kid who said, I'm out of here. I knew this was coming. I'm out. This is not exactly the same thing, but we had an opportunity. We could have said, okay, we're out of here. I have every excuse. I'm saving my life. I don't want to be dead. They want to unalive me and unalive everybody. We're leaving. We're just going to become, melt into the population. We didn't do it. So it was a very, very profound moment in history when the Jewish people embraced this. And again, we talked a lot about this in the previous episode, but I thought it was important to re-emphasize this. And I've added some details we didn't talk about before. And I'll kind of share with you some of the words of the Maharal of Prague, which I think I did not have a chance to share in the previous episode. The Maharal says that it wasn't just when the Jewish people, under the threat of the duress of genocide, didn't walk away, which is very meaningful. But Rashi says, "Mi'avas hanes." It was from the love engendered by the miracle. It wasn't the fact that they said we would remain Jewish even if it will cost our lives. It was the fact that after this was all over and everything was hunky-dory, we said, yes, we are going to accept upon ourselves new mitzvahs. The Maharal says something very interesting. He says, Kasher kiemu mitzvah zeis. They did this new mitzvahs. He says, Kiblu aleim kol mitzvahs b'kal v'chemer. If you're accepting upon yourself 4 new mitzvot, so obviously you must have accepted upon yourself the first 613. Like, what's the logic of saying, Shabbat? Nah, I'm not going to do that. Kashrut? Nah, I don't think so. Tefillin? But I'm going to hear the Megillah every single year. Yeah, really? It's not exactly an enjoyable experience per se. I'm going to make sure I'm going to give him a shloach manot and find a poor person. They took upon themselves mitzvahs. They embraced these mitzvahs. So the Maharal says, Ubazeh, by virtue of acceptance of these mitzvot, Kiblu aleim kol ha-mitzvot. They accepted upon all the mitzvot, and including the ones that they weren't talking about now. And he says, Kasher kiblu, when they accepted upon themselves these mitzvahs, hayu mekablim kol ha-mitzvahs. And that's why it says, Kimu v'kiblu, Kimu ha-mitzvah. They affirmed this mitzvah, and by virtue of acceptance, they affirmed the mitzvot they had received already, by virtue of the fact that they accepted these new additional mitzvot. So this is the beginning. This is what the verse is about. It's like the deeper meaning in the verse. And then there was another very, very important teaching which I shared with you, and I'm going to reiterate it again because the Gemara talks about this as well, and this is important to reiterate. The Gemara says, and this is found in Maseches Megillah on page 7, the Gemara says that you should know, as a matter of fact, that the book of Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh. And the Gemara, citing a number of teachings of the Brisa, says, how do we know that the book of Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh? How do we know? And the Gemara brings a number of different proofs that, like, the author couldn't have said these things without knowing. They had to know, because you can't make statements about what people are thinking and what people might have said if you didn't hear what they said and you can't read their minds. And then the Gemara comes along and says that the milsa adifa mikulu, the thing that's more powerful than anything else, is this verse of kimu v'kiblu. Why is the verse of they accepted and affirmed so powerful? So the Gemara says, in other words, kimu l'mayla mashakiblu l'mata. This verse is telling us that God himself accepted these mitzvot by virtue of the fact that the Sanhedrin ordained these mitzvot here in our lowly terrestrial world. So the Beth Din Shalmaila was maskim. The heavenly court was in agreement with the earthly court, with the Sanhedrin. And how would the authors of the Megillah know that? Like, how could you speak on God's behalf? Who could say something like that unless you know? So they had to know. And if they knew, so Yitzi's asking a question which has nothing to do with the subject, and I'm going to answer it anyway. First of all, hello to everybody who's joining us live on YouTube. Do B'nai Noach have a way out of the Sheva Mitzvahs? No way. Sheva Mitzvahs is not an option. You're born, if you're a human, you are obligated in the 7 Noachide laws. And you can't convert to be a human, at least not to the best of my information. Apparently there's some orangutans who are trying, but I don't know if it doesn't really work. A human's a human. So you're born a human being, and by the way, you're born a Jew. If you're born a Jew, you're also stuck. You don't get to opt out. I'm born a Jew, but I think I'll be a Phoenician. It doesn't work that way. The only time this could be if somebody chose to be a Jew, but didn't really have their free choice. Okay, anyway, going back over here. So this is the power of choice. This is the story of the Megillah. That's about the power of choice, of free choice. And it's about the profundity of heaven being in agreement with what we, the earthly court, said. Now, in some measure, I mean, this is the way God empowered the Sanhedrin. As we make a bracha for the kindling of the menorah, it doesn't say that the heavenly court agreed with the mitzvah of kindling the menorah. It does say in the Torah that you have to follow what the Sanhedrin says. It's a positive mitzvah. And there's also a negative mitzvah that says you are not allowed to depart or deviate from what the Sanhedrin tell you. The verses say, Kechol asher yerucha, you have to follow everything they say, and lo tasur, you're not allowed to veer away from what they are telling you, not to the right to be overstringent or to the left to be more lenient. You have to follow the instructions. So we have a biblical mitzvah to follow what the rabbis say anyway, but only about this we have this incredible statement that says that God, so to speak, agreed. By the way, there's a Gemara in Maseches Makos that says there were 3 things that the Bezdin Shalmaila agreed to, that the heavenly courts agreed to, and I'm not going to go into that because the other two are a subject in and of themselves, but the third of those is the concept of the Megillah and the Mitzvot of Purim. And because that's the case, it's very meaningful. It's a big deal. So this is the kind of the background that I wanted to introduce to you before we go any further. The Manas Halevi, when he speaks about this, he says something very, very interesting about this business of the Jewish people accepting in the time of Purim. I mean, does it really mean the Jewish people accepted it in the time of Purim? Were they not? Was it not accepted earlier? So the Manas Halevi asks a lot of questions. He goes, it's many, many pages to prove his point, but I'm going to read to you his conclusion. He says that it isn't as if they didn't accept the Torah upon themselves fully. It means it wasn't clear. It wasn't obvious. I mean, God knows, but people didn't know. People themselves wondered, did we really accept this? Did we really do this willingly, or were we kind of pushed into it? Was it because of the awesomeness of the moment? He says, Nisha hasofik. There was a question that was left after this story, and the story was Im kibluha midaitam uviritzoinam. Did they accept this with the full knowledge and understanding of what they were doing, biritzoinam, with their full will, or maybe kibluha mipachad ha'ir? Maybe the threat was, or however you call the threat, but there was an overwhelming element here. And he says the story of Purim demonstrates that regardless of superficialities, when we did accept it with truth. How do you know? Well, because we had an opportunity to opt out and we didn't opt out. And if you had an opportunity to opt out and you didn't opt out, then you must have opted in the first time. In other words, Purim is not the story of the Jewish people actually accepting it upon themselves. It's a story of clarity. It's a story of affirmation, when this becomes something which is obvious, rather than the story of when they accepted it upon themselves per se. That's what the Manas Halevi learns, the Chatzi Hayiriyah, which is a commentary on his commentary. He says, what we can understand from this is, if they were prepared to add new dimensions to Torah, things which they didn't accept before, so clearly then they really wanted this. Why would you take upon yourself new mitzvahs? They could have said, Mordechai, listen, we're very happy there was a miracle, but no new mitzvahs. We're having enough carrying the load of 613. You're adding 4 new mitzvahs? Please, we add mitzvahs and we become obligated and found wanting before God because we didn't observe the mitzvahs. We're not going to be ready to accept any new mitzvahs. It's bad enough we have to do the first ones. But the very fact that they embraced new mitzvahs shows that the embracing of mitzvahs was something that they did in a wholehearted way. And the Manas Halevi says, this is, the question was the Kabbalah Tamarishana be'ones? And he says, from the very fact that they saw themselves through all of this, and they embraced new mitzvahs, Haychiach sofan al techilatan. He says, this proves that what happened originally was indeed sincere. And that when they accepted it upon themselves, regardless of any nudging that took place on the surface, whatever it means, kafaleim harkegigis, whatever the holding the mountain over them means, but nonetheless, it is clear that they always deep down wanted to accept the Torah, readily accepted the Torah, joyfully accepted the Torah, happily accepted this, not only the written Torah, but also the oral Torah. So this is the story. This is the story of the acceptance. Now that we understand the background of the acceptance, you understand what really happened over here. Or as the Eshkol HaSofer adds, Eshkol HaKofer adds very interestingly, that the first year, which is in an earlier pasuk, they accepted upon themselves to observe the miracle that just happened. But a year later, the fact that they were accepting it upon themselves, and the fact that they accepted this upon themselves for posterity, that's the key. When they accepted this upon themselves forever, then this was a sign that it wasn't a one-off, it wasn't just because, wow, something special happened, let's celebrate, but rather that they were truly committed to Judaism. They understood that God's miracles have to be acknowledged, and if we have another opportunity to connect to Hashem, which is what a mitzvah is, then we embrace that opportunity. So the Eshkol HaKofer is very clear, and he says this means, therefore, Purim is a ke'ein matan Torah. It's like a almost acceptance of the Torah, It's like, it proves that when they said Nasav and Ishma, and as I'm reiterating, we learned this in the previous episode, that's why the verse opens up, Aleihem, Val Zarom, Val Kol Hanilvam Aleihem, just like at Matan Torah, all generations were present in some way, and everybody agreed to be part of this. So it was also at the time of Purim. Everybody was there. I don't know if you remember. It was a long time ago. We were there in some way, shape, or form. We were there. We were represented, and we bought in. So this is the background of the first. Again, reiterating what we learned in the first half of the verse. Now let's move forward. So we say velo ya'avor, and this is not something that is going to pass. It's not going to fade. It's not going to just move on. Oh, okay, fine. That was nice. We did this for 500 years. Let's do something else now. And really and truly, anything which is merely cultural does not last. Culture doesn't last. Societies don't last. Civilizations don't last. They all crumble. It's a matter of time. We're in the midst of one of the strangest crumblings of civilizations that we've seen in a very long time. We're watching it crumble before our eyes. Now there's pushback. I don't know. Nobody can be certain as to where the Western civilization will be in 5 or 10 years from now. Heroes of decades or centuries, all of a sudden are villains. Statues have been torn down. Songs are being discarded. That's the nature of the human experience. Always in a state of flux, always shifting, always changing. In as many ways, we go back to what we were with it's like almost cyclical changes, but there's still changes. And here we are, all these years later, almost 25 centuries later, we're still keeping Purim. We're still at it. So, and this is how they accepted it upon themselves from the very beginning, velo yavor. So what is the meaning? Why does the Torah have to say, if they accepted it upon themselves and upon their children, vela kol hanilvam aleihem, and velo yavor, and it will not pass on? Well, of course it's not going to pass on. You accepted it upon yourself and your children, which is your progeny till the end of time, and all those who will join the Jewish people. Why do we have to add the word lo yavor? So here's a literal meaning, and then we'll go into something a little less literal, and then we'll talk about this in a mystical and spiritual way. On the literal level, the Manas HaLevi tells us that the Gemara, the Talmud, in the beginning of Masechet Megillah teaches that it is possible to preempt the Megillah reading. Now, we don't do this in today's day and age for a variety of reasons. However, at a time when Jewish people lived in very small places, hamlets, where they didn't have either a congregation or somebody who was proficient enough to read the Megillah, but they would come to sell their wares. These are farmers. And they would come to sell their wares on market day. A market day was Mondays, a market day was Thursdays. Those are the 2 days people would come in to sell their wares. That's when they come into town. So they made their journey, they got up very early, they pray quickly, and they'd make the trek into town, they'd sell whatever they had to sell, and then they went back to their farming, and 2 days later they were back at market. So on these market days, if there was not going to be an opportunity for them to hear the Megillah, then these kinds of people, these citizens, could already read the Megillah from the 11th day of Adar. From Biyud Aleph, Biyud Beis, and Biyud Gimel. Already from the 11th. Why? Because if Purim comes out to be for example, on a Sunday, so the Sunday is the 14th, so the 13th is Shabbat, that's not going to work. And Friday is the 12th, that's not going to work. But they will be there on the 11th. So when they come in on Thursday, on the 11th, that's when they hear the Megillah being read. So he says, Makdimin velo ma'achrin. The days of Purim will be celebrated in a way where we don't push it off. We sometimes celebrate early, but never late. It never gets pushed off. Interesting thing. Like this is unusual, because typically in Judaism the day is the day, and that's the way it is. But not on Purim. And for example, this year, because we have Purim on Friday on Erev Shabbat, Yerushalayim, or places like Yerushalayim, should have Purim on Shabbat. Yeah, but we can't read the Megillah on Shabbat for a variety of reasons. So when do they read the Megillah? The answer is no, just like us on Friday. Everybody reading the Megillah the same day this year. So makdimin v'loy ma'achrin. That's the meaning of v'loy yaver. So v'loy yaver, nobody's dying, nobody's passing away. We know that this is going to be for posterity. The v'loy yaver is they accepted upon themselves. They would always celebrate Purim early, never push it off. You never push off a good thing. So when it's a fast day, especially a fast day which commemorates a sad event, if we can push it off, we push it off. Sure, it's a great idea. And maybe push it away altogether. But a thing like Purim, and this further emphasizes how they did this with gusto. They weren't saying, oh gosh, got to do this Megillah thing. Okay, can we do it next week? Let's do it at different. No, they not only they're ready to do it, they're ready to always bring it on. Bring it on early. Things you bring on early are things you're happy about. And things you're not happy about, you don't mind pushing them off. So this shows what we call the ratzon v'chefetz. It shows the desire, it shows the excitement, it shows the exuberance, the enthusiasm with which they accepted this mitzvah, and that's why they could be so sure that it would never, so to speak, pass on or move away. The Ibn Ezra has a very interesting comment on this business of v'lo yaver. He says that the concept of v'lo yaver means ein rashoy Yehudi la'avre. It is not appropriate for a true Jew to ignore Purim. Powerful statement. He says if you're really a Yid, you don't push Purim away. Real Jews will always embrace Purim. And there's ignorance, and there's apathy. You know the difference between ignorance and apathy? I don't know and I don't care. so there's a lot of ignorance. People don't know, they don't care, they can't be bothered. But in the end, the nature of Jewish people is, we're like the boomerang. We always come home. And when Jewish people come home, they will always re-embrace Purim. And that's been the case. They always re-embrace Purim. Purim always comes back. It always comes back. And so this is the v'lo yaver. He says, Ein rashoy, if you're only a Yehudi, if you're living life Jewishly, it'll come back. It'll come back. It keeps making a comeback. It never ever fades away. And here's something quite fascinating. So this business of v'lo yaver, what does it mean when we say v'lo yaver? How do you know it'll never go away? So Reevaluation Brisker was a great Rosh Hashiva in the world of jurisprudence in the past century. Reevaluation Brisker has this whole fascinating analysis of the nature of the injunction. He says the nature of the injunction, they accepted it upon themselves in a manner that they would never abandon this. They didn't accept upon themselves just to do it. Part of the acceptance is that they would never abandon this acceptance. It was a binding acceptance. How does he get that? Because Rashi says, "V'kach kiblu aleihem sheimei haPurim le'yavru." The Jewish people made a commitment. We will never forget Purim. I don't know if they'll forget the Alamo, but they will never forget Purim. That was the commitment they made. So it's like people make all kinds of commitments. We'll never forget you, never forgotten, whatever. Either yes or no. I don't know. People make these kind of, we'll never forget. I see people forget again and again too. Never again is again and again. I don't know if they're never going to forget. But Purim, the acceptance was, the nature of it was that they accepted upon themselves, we will never forget this. That was their commitment. And as such, that was something that was kind of burned into the DNA of this mitzvah, and it's something that continued to follow along for posterity. Now, a third interpretation of these words v'lo yaver, and this is my personal favorite, is in the Manos Halevi, and many others say something. Some say v'lo yaver means v'lo yifsek. It simply means, matter of fact, this is never ending. This is a non-expiration date. No expiration date here. It's non-ending. It's eternal. And where do we see an expression lo yaver? Lo yaver, it shouldn't pass on. So the Manos Halevi says, actually, it's something we say on a daily basis in our Pesukei de Zimmer, the verses of praise. It's Psalm 148. We say it every single morning in our Shacharit service. We say that God set nature into motion, and Vayamidem la'ad la'olam. Nature is something which is set in motion forever. And as they say, forever is a very long time. So it says nature is set in place. It's Chok Nosan. He is given a statute. Chok Nosan, says Rashi, Bahem. What's the Chok Nosan Bahem? The sun will rise in the morning and it will set in the evening. It hasn't not happened. The moon will appear at night, assuming there's no clouds. The moon actually rises too. And the moon sets also. The moon sets. It's in Pesukei de Zimmer, yeah? In Psalm 148. Chok Nosan v'lo yaver. So v'lo yaver, it will not pass, says Rashi, oto hachok, that statute. And as the Radak puts it, v'achoik shenosan lahem b'tchilas habriya, the statute that God implanted in the cosmos at the beginning of creation, where we read the story of creation, la'olam la'yishtana sidram, it's never going to change. The sun will rise in the east, the sun will set in the west, and the same will be with the moon, and that's the way it is. And it's never changed. The temperature of Earth may change. Earth goes through cooling periods. Earth goes through hotter periods. Maybe it is as a result of people's activities. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. Yeshua held up the sun. You think what you just said. He held up the sun. In other words, he stopped nature temporarily, and then nature went right back to the way it is. And by the way, he didn't get the sun to rise in the west either. He simply stopped it in its trajectory. Okay, so but that's where nature is interrupted. But as a rule, nature continues. Nature continues. The waters of the Reed Sea also stood still for a while. Then they came crashing down. So this is, he's just using this. He says this is where you can see the Hebrew syntax of the concept of V'lo Yaver. We see it in something in Tillim. David HaMelech already puts us in Tillim well over 1,000 years before. V'lo Yaver. It doesn't change. It's unchanging. This is the nature of Purim. Now, I just want to point out to you that the words V'lo Yaver, once you have the Gemara Masechet Shabbat, once you have the Gemara Masechet Megillah, once you know that this is something that the Jewish people had really, in a sense, like a renaissance of sorts, re-accepted upon themselves the idea that the Torah was given to them and that they would do mitzvot. That once you understand that this is something from heaven that there was a commitment to, or God showed his pleasure at this idea, as we talked about last week in great length from the Maharal of Prague. So this helps us to understand the meaning of V'lo Yaver, that this is not going to pass, it's not going to change. And here's something, a final detail, which shows us how important the reading of the Megillah is. So the Eshkol HaKofer says that the Gemara in Maseches Megillah, on Daf Beis, or Daf Daled, talks to us about the idea of mishpacha u'mishpacha. And we'll talk about this because it's in the next verse when we get to that. But he says, what does it mean it's observed by all kinds of families? So what's like a defining hallmark of a family? Or nuclear family. So the Jewish people really are made up of 3 clans. There's Cohen, there's Levi, and there's Yisrael. And they are inherently different. It's like a different soul. Yes, it's true, when a woman marries a Cohen, her soul is modified by virtue of marriage, such is the power of marriage. And she gets absorbed into the spiritual DNA of her husband, and now she's eating special Cohen food, and her children are going to be Cohenim. And the same thing is true, there's a change with a Levi also. There's a mitzvah called Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn. If you're a Levi, you have no obligation. That's a genetic thing. It's a spiritual genetics. So that's mishpacha u'mishpacha, the Kohanim and Leviim. Now, what are Kohanim and Leviim, what are they famous for? Not in today's modern day and age. What are they famous for? What were the Kohanim and Leviim selected for? Why did the Jewish people have an obligation to provide them with sustenance? They're in the Beis HaMikdash. What could be more important than serving in the Beit HaMikdash? That's like the pinnacle of one's service to Hashem, representing the nation of Israel in God's chosen sanctuary. What could be more important? Says the Gemara, listening to the Megillah. That's more important. Really? Yeah, the Gemara says, yeah. And then there's a mitzvah called learning Torah, and it says, Talmud Torah keneged kulam, learning Torah equals everything, and yet we pass over the mitzvah of Torah study in order to listen to the Megillah. And there's a famous question about this, isn't the Megillah Torah? And so if you're listening to the Megillah, you're learning Torah anyway. And the answer is that bittul Torah, or wasting time from studying Torah, doesn't mean you're doing nothing. If you're studying Torah on a very, very simple level, but you could study Torah on a profounder level, it's also wasting time from Torah study. So a person who could be studying Torah in a very, very deep and meaningful way, and instead he's just listening to the sound of the Baal Korah and the kids making noise, he is a better way to use his time. Or so you would think. No, v'lo yaver. Hakol botol mipnei mikra Megillah. Everything, nothing trumps mikra Megillah. Nothing trumps mikra Megillah with one exception. And that is, if there's a corpse that has to be buried. The only thing that trumps the listening to the Megillah is human dignity itself. The dignity we afford human remains, that's it. So the Eshkol HaKofer says that's the meaning of v'lo yaver. V'lo yaver means nothing passes ahead of it. It trumps everything, nothing trumps it. Okay, so that's the meaning of v'lo yaver. Now we understand, and we have an appreciation of why this v'lo yaver. That's why I wanted to reiterate some of the things we learned about before. So, why is this so important? Why did you have to accept it for posterity? Why was this meaningful? Why did it make such a difference? And the answer is precisely because of everything we just spoke about. That's why lo yaver, because Purim is such a big deal. It's not just they try to kill us, we survive. That happened a lot of times. This was a different kind of event. This was a watershed event. This is a transformational event for the Jewish people. Incidentally, there's a beautiful talk from the Rebbe. It's an edited talk, actually. It's in Sefer HaSichos in Tafshin Nun. Something the Rebbe spoke about the Shabbos after Purim in 1990. And the Rebbe talked about this business of holding the barrel over their heads and the Jewish people accepting it. And the Rebbe followed the approach of the Manas HaLevi, very interestingly. The Rebbe said that it's not only a question of, okay, so the Jewish people accepted the Torah from here onward. No, he says, actually, the Maidah Rabbah, the great disclaimer, was eclipsed post ipso facto, backwards. This revealed that there was never a disclaimer. It looked like there was a disclaimer. It looked like we might not have been 100% serious. But this, in the Rebbe's words, his barer his gala, now it became clear. This was the proof, positive, that Kabbalah HaTorah be'eis Matan Torah, that when we received the Torah at the time of Matan Torah, that it was b'shleimut, that it was a perfect acceptance, that it was not be'ones. It was not something that was under duress, or we were forced into it, but rather it was biratzon. And the Rebbe explained something very, very important, and I want to share it with you, because when we use these words of the Jewish people being forced into it and not forced into it, what does that even mean? If we're just getting forced into it, the kind of marriage is this? We're in a marriage with God. Sure, we're in a marriage. Put a gun to our head. He said, you better get married, I'll shoot you. Okay, so you got married. Is that what it means? The Rebbe says, when we use this expression, onus means forced. In modern Hebrew, forgive me, an onus means a rape. In modern Hebrew, it's obviously like, God forbid to say that that's a willing, God forbid, a willing participant. The Rebbe said it doesn't mean it in a graphic sense here. It doesn't mean God forced us. It's not the opposite of what we wanted. It means that there was a little extra encouragement. Kind of like we got bribed along. Sometimes you want your kids to do something, you offer them all kinds of things, and you get them to buy in. So the question is, was there undue pressure applied? Was there additional pressure? Would we have chosen this anyway? This becomes the question. So Yitzi is saying, by the Mabul, nature stopped. Okay, Yitzi, don't make me crazy. The point was that in Tehillim it uses that expression. I'm not getting into this business of nature. That's what it says. Chok nosam v'lo yaver. Okay, that's all. So the point is, of lo yaver means doesn't change. Okay, back here to. So the idea of that it wasn't that it was ba'inus means that maybe we weren't 100% into this. Especially the way the Alter Rebbe explains it. The Kofar Mel Har Kegigis means, the Alter Rebbe explains the words Kegigis, he says things that surround us. It's like what's called in the proverbial mystical expression, Or HaSoiviv, it was an atmospheric thing. Hashem revealed certain things to us. And we saw and felt the presence of God, and it was like overwhelming. It's like intoxicating. It was like, we swooned on a spiritual level. So the question was, did we really, really want this? Were we really wholeheartedly embracing this, or we went along because it was the perfect storm and everything seemed to be right? So what else are we going to say? No. So the Rebbe said that's the meaning of ba'inus. This was we ourselves weren't sure. We questioned ourselves. Did we really accept this wholeheartedly? And therefore, in the days of Purim, and the Rebbe here rotates this a little bit away from the literal meaning of the Gemara, where me'avas anes, that this is in the time of the salvation or the acceptance of the mitzvah. The Rebbe rotates this back to the time of the actual decree that was leveled against us. We had a target on our backs. And he said at that time, the Jewish people willingly accepted upon themselves to be Jewish. And there was not a question of backing out. And that shows that they were always in it to begin with. So it's not a question of we became obligated in the Mitzvot from Purim onward. It's more a question or more an issue of Purim was a litmus test. Purim was the ultimate barometer that showed that we, the Jewish people, were in this for real. And that's a very powerful thing. Sometimes you have, people who are in a relationship, and you wonder if that relationship is real. Some people don't even know themselves if it's real. There's like a ridiculous joke they tell of this guy who wanted to marry a girl, and she didn't want to marry him. And then his father died and left him a huge estate. And then he asked her again, and this time she said yes. And he said, honey, would you have married me if my father didn't leave me $10 million? And she said, honey, I'll marry you whoever leaves you $10 million. Right? So, so the question is does she really love me? Is this, or maybe, she was a social climber. And then when all of a sudden, when the money dries up, so to speak, and none of those things are there, and the person stands by your side, then you know that they love you, not what you bring to the table, not what you have, but they love you yourself, and that's the proof. And however the relationship started with all the superficial things, but at a certain point it became a commitment to you, and you're sticking through thick and thin. You know how they say, you want to know who your real friends are? When everything starts going south for you, you'll know who your real friends are. Right now, and you're successful, and everything's good, and you're cool, and you're life at a party, everybody's your friend. But when all of a sudden, when you're a pariah, and when it's not so cool to be a friend, then you'll know who your real friends are. So how do we find out that who we really are? We ourselves, we didn't even know ourselves who we really are. This was revealing for us. It clarified things for us. It made us realize how profound our commitment was. And therefore, Purim is a question of what we call limafreya. Purim is something which was a revelation of the past rather than the creation or introduction of something new. And the Rebbe used very interesting words as he developed this idea. The Rebbe said that the word kofa aleim har kigigis is also related to the Zoharic expression of itkafia. So you have a challenge, you have a craving, a lust, a desire which is unhealthy, and you crush it. I say crush it. You want it, just crush it. So you crush it, you go against the Yetzer Hara. And there's the Yetzer Hara is there. And the Yetzer Hara sometimes seems like a mountain, it says. Yetzer Hara, so it comes at you with this huge mountain of desire. And you have to overcome Yetzer Hara. It's not an easy thing to do. But then there's something called itapcha. Itapcha means I'm not fighting with or crushing or breaking the circumstances. I'm rotating and transforming. I'm elevating the circumstances. And the Rebbe says that at the time of Matan Torah, we simply crushed the Yetzer Hara. We ignored the Yetzer Hara. We just turned away from the Yetzer Hara, and we would be committed to God. It was like avodah tzaddik. It was like avodah of a righteous person, never tasted sin, doesn't want to taste sin. Don't confuse me with the facts. I'm not interested. I know what I want to be. I know that's where my focus is. But on Purim, we were like a Baal Tshuva. We're like somebody who tasted sin, and we slipped and tripped and fell down, and we dusted ourselves off, and we said, no. I went elsewhere. I'm going back. I know where I want to be. And the interesting thing was that Purim represents the idea not of iskafia, not of the crushing of the enemy, but ultimately Purim represents the idea of the turning around of the situation, because the very same king who gleefully accepted upon himself and was willing to carry out our genocide, the very same king became our protector in an overt way. The very same king. And Haman's house became a yeshiva. So there's the element of ishapcha. This is and that's why Purim is so important. Purim, as they say, it's a big deal. It's big. Okay, so now let's move on as we're making our way through this verse. The next part of the verse is, so what did they accept upon themselves? We still didn't say what they accepted upon themselves. And here the verse says, they accepted upon themselves, lihiyot osim et shnei hayamim ha'ela, that they would make these days. How would they make them? Kichtavam uchizmanam. They would do it as it is written. They would do it in their proper time. B'chol shana v'shana, in all years that would follow. Or as we say, it would become an annual observance. So what is the meaning of this business of hayu osim, lihiyot osim, that they were going to make these days? What does it mean to make the day? So the Manas HaLevi cites teachings that come from an earlier source And it seems like he's kind of following through with something that the Even Ezer says. The Even Ezer, in our printed version of the Even Ezer doesn't have this. Our printed version of the Even Ezer, it simply says, "V'lo yavar," and they're not going to go away from it. A Jew doesn't go away from this. But the Manas Halevi seems to have had a manuscript or a tradition from the Even Ezer where he says like this: when we would make these days festive days, we would make a meal, we would make a holiday. Come what may, you're going to make it special. And he says, "Liyot mitaknen umevashlim." We'd be baking and cooking. We make it, cook up a storm. You make it special. And he says, where do we see something like that? He says, it doesn't mean to make a day. Ein yecholet ba'adam la'asal hayom. A person can't make a day. How do you make a day? It's not exactly a thing we can manufacture. You can't manufacture time. Time gets manufactured from a higher place and stands still for no one. As the Chatzi Hayriya, the commentary on the commentary says, he says, I efsher la'odam livrei hayom. Nobody can create a day. Can't create extra days in the calendar. That doesn't exist. Creation of time is not within humankind's purview. So what does it mean? Lihiot osim es shnei yamim. It doesn't say they would observe these days. It said they would make these days. How do you make a day? It's a strange expression. Let's make, people say like, make my day. How do you make a day? Make my day, okay. How do you make a day? So he says the meaning then of make a day is that you should make the day special. How do you make the day special? You make a meal. You make a festivity. And he says we find this with regard to the Shabbat. That with regard to Shabbat, it says that the Jewish people would observe the Shabbat, la'asot et Shabbat. They would make the Shabbat. How do you make the Shabbat? Can't manufacture Shabbat. 6 days go by, the 7th is here, Shabbat has arrived. You can't make it. You can sanctify a day, you can't make a day. What you can do is you can make the day special. So he says, literally this means they accepted upon themselves to make these days special. They would make them special. And on some level, like some of the Spanish sages, like Rabbi Shmuel de Izovedo and others like this, maintain that there's nothing inherently special about Purim. The day is not a different day. It's not a different kind of day. And of course, you're allowed to do malacha on Purim. One is permitted to do the kinds of work which we're not permitted to do on a Shabbat or a Yom Tov. You shouldn't go to work because that's not a respectful thing to do on Purim. But you can drive to shul, you can strike your match, you can cook, you can do all the things we do on a weekday. It's a weekday. It's a weekday. So it's not a day which has been taken out of circulation. Shabbat is a day taken out of circulation. We don't have Purim Kiddush. There's no such thing. It's funny. There's some people, in people's minds, Kiddush means that you raise a glass. I don't know, raise a glass. So it was recently, I was helping a family plan the wedding. They said, who should we honor with Kiddush? I'm like, why are you making Kiddush? They said, no, you start the event. Yeah, somebody has to make Kiddush. I'm like, not exactly. Well, he says, don't you make Kiddush before the motzi? So we're thinking of honoring the grandfather with the motzi. Could we honor you with Kiddush? So I have to explain to them that Kiddush is something that's done on Shabbat and on Yom Tov.
What about when Mashiach comes?
When Mashiach comes? What?
Would be a holiday,
Will the Mashiach's day of his coming be a Yom Tov? I don't know. We'll find out in Mitzvah Hashem. Somehow I doubt it. Somehow I doubt it because biblical holidays have already been given to us. And the biblical holidays were given to us in the Torah, and it says that the Torah is not going to change. So the rabbinic holidays we have are Purim and Chanukah. And in fact, they are not Yomim Tovim. We don't make Kiddush. We can't make Kiddush. Michal Davids is saying there's Kiddush under the chuppah. No, sweetheart. There's a cup of wine under the chuppah. There's not Kiddush. There's a cup of wine at Kiddushin. It's not Kiddush. Kiddush is a mitzvah of using your words to sanctify time that is inherently sanctified already. Now, on Yom Tov, to some degree, we do make it. We do make it a Yom Tov. Why? Because the Bezdin has to decide when Rosh Chodesh should be. And you know when the first day of the month is, that's where you can count to the 15th day of the month, and then you'll know when Sukkot is, or you know when Pesach is. So that, and the calendar is made by human beings. God gives us his calendar. He says, schedule my appointments. He gives the Sanhedrin the right to schedule when he shows up. So in some level, that's why we say, we finish off the Kiddush on Shabbat, we say, Mikadesh HaShabbat. On Yom Tov, we say, Mikadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Because God sanctifies Israel, and by virtue of God sanctifying Israel, Israel sanctifies the day. But that's only on Shabbat and Yom Tov. We don't sanctify Purim. There is no Kiddush on Purim. And of course, no Havdalah. And you don't make Kiddush at a wedding. I said, Ari, what do you want me to tell you? If you want to raise a glass and start a meal with a glass of wine, you can do whatever you want. It's not Kiddush. So they said, boy, Izmir, we have this great uncle. How are we going to honor him? This is like a big problem, right? So I had to summon all of Solomon's wisdom. And I said to them, I have an idea. They could both make the motzi. They said, that's unbelievable. You're going to cut the motzi in half. I said, cut the motzi in half. They're both, and so that's what happened. They both got up together. And don't cut the baby, but cut the motzi. And they both cut the challah. They both made a motzi together. And these elder gentlemen were happy that they had a speaking part. They got to say something. They both screamed hamotzi out loud on the microphone. Everybody's happy. You can't make Kiddush. So he's not saying, what does it mean, Osem Es Hayom? So therefore, the Ibn Ezra, is, as he is cited by the Manas Halevi, says, it means you cook up a storm. You have to make this day special. Now obviously, if you go to work and it's a regular day, you're not making it special. The Jewish people took it upon themselves to make this day special. That's the story of Purim. That's the meaning of observing Purim. It's not a day like other days. We make it a different day. It's different by virtue of our behavior. It's different by virtue of our preparation. And indeed, anybody who lives in an observant milieu of Purim, it's a different kind of day. In fact, there's a day unlike any other. It's a very different kind of day. So that's the meaning of Osem Es Hayom. And if you think about it, these words then give us a real snapshot of how Purim was always supposed to be, the way it is. A really special day, because we make it that way. Because we do really special things. This is on a very literal level. However, to be sure, there is an emphasis on a power attached to the days of Purim. It's not so simple. There is a power attached to the days of Purim because the Mefarshim tell us that although these days are not holy by virtue of the Kedusha like Shabbat and Yom Tov, but nonetheless, the day becomes sanctified or made special by virtue of the mitzvot that we do on Purim. And a mitzvah means a connection to Hashem. And you can't read the Megillah on the wrong day. And you can't give Mishloach Manot at the wrong time. And you can't give Matanot LeEvyonim at the wrong time. You have to give it at the right time. Right? So it's pretty much universally understood that you can't give Mishloach Manot on the night of Purim. And that you have to listen to the Megillah at night, and then you have to listen to the Megillah during the day. And it's two parts of the mitzvah. And you have to do that twice. It's like mitzvah obligations. So what makes it special is actually the mitzvahs. And here's how the Eshkol HaKofer puts it. He says that the idea, sorry, it's not the Eshkol HaKofer, I saw this in the Ralbag Gersonides. I believe Ibn Gershon says like this. What is the meaning of Lios Osim, to make these days? He says the rest of the verses, Lios Osim Eshnei Ma'ilo Kichsavam, the way they were written. He said you make it special by the way it's written, which means Shekosav Mordechai. What did Mordechai write? He wrote Sheyiyu Yemei Mishte V'Simcha. There should be days of feasting and merriment. Yes, okay, that's the meal. But he says Mishloach Manot, giving the parcel of 2 foodstuffs. He says it means Matanot LeEvyonim. And by virtue of those mitzvot, the day becomes special. Yitzi is asking if you were encouraged to wear Shabbat clothing on Purim. It's a good question, Yitzi. It's not a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. You don't have to wear Shabbat clothing. There isn't an emphasis. And of course, many people have a custom of wearing costumes on Purim. But our minhag is, the custom has become that on Purim we do wear Shabbat clothing. But that's a custom, unless you're wearing a costume, which works too. So you're dressing up for it. In other words, you're either dressing up in finery or you're dressing up in a costume. And when people go to the wedding, they're not making Kiddush, but they're still wearing the nice clothes. They're dressing up for the occasion. So it's very much like the wedding. It's special by virtue of, do we make it special? And we have to strive for that. It doesn't happen by itself. So kichsavim uchizmana means that it's special by virtue of the mitzvahs that we do. And this is something which is emphasized, as I said, by a number of the Rishonim who talk about that the point is, that's why we said Lios Osim Kichsavam, the way it's written in the Pirush HaRekeach of Rabbi Eliezer Megamazia, the Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, he says very clearly, Kefi ha-mitzvot ha-ktuvot ba-Megillah, according to the mitzvot as they are spelled out in the scroll of Esther. That's what makes this day special. Follow the good book, so to speak. Now Rashi says, what is the meaning of Kichsavam? Kichsavam, he says, Shetehei ha-Megillah ktuva ktav ashurit. Ktav ashurit is the writing of the Sefer Torah. And the Megillah is a different kind of scroll. It's like a Sefer Torah. It has halachot of a Sefer Torah. It's written in Torah script. It's written on parchment. There's halachot of how it has to be written. And though it doesn't have the same holiness of a Sefer Torah, but the Megillah is the closest thing you'll ever find to a Sefer Torah. And he said, that's the point. That's how they made it special. They made it special by virtue of the fact that it was unique in mitzvot along with a biblical scroll. Like its own little Sefer Torah. That's how powerful Purim is. That's how special Purim is. And interestingly, the Vilna Gaon has a different take on the word kichsavim. And the truth is that it's a little bit hard to understand what Vilna Gaon is saying, because kichsavim means the way it's written. But nonetheless, in the printed version, it says, Hi hakriya. This is the reading. And I guess the understanding of Vilna Gaon's interpretation would be, you have to read it from a kosher Megillah. If you're reading the Megillah from a printed book, or from a non-kosher Megillah, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. But it's the reading of the mitzvah. It's not the making of the Megillah in and of itself doesn't make Purim. I mean, he does have a good point. If somebody has a gorgeous Megillah and it's sitting on your shelf, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Not any more than somebody having a beautiful pair of tefillin. I once asked a guy, I said to him in Hebrew, I said, Samta tefillin hayom? He tells me, Ken. I mean, it's like, you put on tefillin? He says, yes. So I was a little surprised. I didn't think he put on tefillin. I said, Be'emet? He says, Ken, Samti baron. I put it in the bookshelf. I put it on the shelf. I said, that doesn't work. You're not fulfilling any mitzvah. You got to put it on your body. He said, all right, fine, I'll put it on tefillin. So maybe this is, some question whether Vilna Gaon meant kriya and they say ksiva. But the truth is, it makes sense to me that the printed version is the right version, because after all, Rashi says ksav ashuri. So what does the Vilna Gaon have to add if Rashi says that already? The Vilna Gaon is making a point of saying that we read it. That's the point. That's the... Yetzi is pointing out other parts of Tanakh don't need ksav ashuris. That is correct. That is correct. That there is a custom. Some use a klaf for the haftarah, but there's no halacha about that. And you can make a bracha, the blessings over the haftarah, when you use a printed book. You don't have to use a klaf. You don't have to use an actual scroll for the haftarah. And it's a custom at best. And again, the way the Ralbag emphasizes, it's the emphasis on the mitzvot. He says why the way it's written. He says because the mitzvot shekosav Mordechai alev, the mitzvot that Mordechai wrote. That is the point that is being made over here. Now, very interestingly, on this business of the ksav ashuri, of writing it in this way specifically, so the Rebbe once pointed out that earlier we have in the Megillah the same exact verse that says Mordechai wrote a book, and he sent letters around. If you go back to verse 23, it says V'kibla Yehudim asher achelu la'asais ve'is asher kosav Mordechai. The Jewish people accepted, and what Mordechai had written. So why doesn't Rashi say Ksav Ashur is there? Why does Rashi only say Ksav Ashur is here on verse 27? The Rebbe says an amazing thing. Listen to this. The Rebbe says, because the Pashtos, this was on Purim I think it was Shabbos, Shushan Purim, 1981. It was Purim like this year, 1981. I remember it still very well. I was only 10 years old, but it was like an amazing Friday afternoon. And after Mincha, the Rebbe said a mimer to a tiny crowd of people. And the Rebbe said everybody should say L'chaim. And I have a vivid memory of that Friday night in 770. The place was like, it's like unbelievable. Simchas Torah on steroids. It was like wild. And there was a Farbrengen the next day. And the next day the Rebbe asked at the Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke about Purim because it wasn't a Farbrengen on Friday on Purim itself. And the Rebbe asked this question. And the Rebbe gave a very interesting answer. The Rebbe said the first letter that Mordechai sent out was instructions for what had to be done. It wasn't a sacred scroll. It was an instruction scroll. And the scroll said like this: take up arms and defend yourself. And the Jewish people said, yes, we will. Imagine that. They're going to defend themselves. They were going to fight for their existence. So that had to be written to them in their language. It wasn't necessarily written in Hebrew. This had to be understood. This was not about writing fancy Hebrew words. This was G-U-N, gun. Okay? Do what you, in your language, the way you understand it. Defend yourself. This was very literal. But a year later, when Mordechai wrote the story up, that's already now it's written in Ksav Ashuri. Now it's written like a Torah. Now it's Tanakh. Now it's prophecy. And here we are studying it thousands of years later, uncovering all kinds of hidden messages. Now it's Ksav Ashuri. It's the second letter that Mordechai writes. It's the Mordechai, not the instruction letter. It's the Purim letter. It's the Megillah of Esther that's written in Ksav Ashuri. That's what the Rebbe said. That's why Rashi comments over here and says this over here. So I want to now kind of tie it all together. What we've learned is that the Jewish people accepted upon themselves the Torah, the mitzvahs, Yiddishkeit, and this was very meaningful and it's very profound. And the day is made special by virtue of the mitzvahs that we fulfill. So there's an edited sikh from the Rebbe, L'kutei Sichos Chelik Tezayin, and I'm just going to give you a synopsis of it, which kind of ties this all together. The Rebbe says, in addition to what we learned from the Maharal and from other Rishonim, that you can see that the Jewish people were excited about this by accepting new mitzvot, the Rebbe said that if it was such a big event, why wouldn't we have some kind of huge kind of celebration, like a Simchas Torah thing? We accepted the Torah. And the Rebbe says that the point is not that this is a new beginning. It's not something new or different. It's something deeper. It's the same thing, yet made more profound. And the Rebbe said that in every one of the mitzvahs of Purim, we have essentially something that we've always done. It's not entirely new, but it's done and then some. It's like the kimu v'kiblu. And the Rebbe goes through the mitzvahs. The Rebbe said, okay, so let's talk about the mitzvahs. The first mitzvah of Purim is the scroll. The reading of the scroll. The reading of a scroll in and of itself is not a new thing to the Jewish people. The Jewish people have been reading the scroll since the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. I shared with you on Shabbos, famous Gemara in Bava Kama, Maseches Daf Pei Beis. The Gemara talks over there about the takanot, about the injunctions of Ezra. And the Gemara says Ezra instituted the Torah be read on Monday, on Thursday, and Shabbat afternoon. The Gemara comes back, what do you mean? That's Ezra? That's from the days in the beginning. It was the Nevi'im Shebedei Shel Moshe. The Talmud Yerushalmi says Moshe Rabbeinu himself. The Rambam just says Moshe Tikin. And the Kesef Mishnah in his commentary says Moshe Tikin means that the prophets in the time of Moshe would not do anything without the tutelage of Moshe. It's like Moshe's injunction. So we had readings. The Gemara says in Bava Kama that it wasn't a reading necessarily. It was either 3 verses read by 3 different people, or one person was reading 3 verses. The syntax changed, the style changed. Ezra made it a more, he filled in the blanks, he made it more prominent, the Torah reading more prominent. And he also included a Torah reading for Shabbat afternoon, according to the Meiri, because people shouldn't spend their Shabbatot just getting together and shooting the breeze, but they should come to Shalom. So Torah readings are very old. Readings, scriptural readings, public scriptural readings go back to the very beginning of peoplehood. However, as a rule, there are no readings at night. In some communities, they do some Torah reading at night, on the night of Simchas Torah, but this is only a custom, and there's no bracha that's recited. The reading with a bracha at night, and then again during the day, is unique to Purim. And on Purim, you have to hear every single word, and you have to hear it in order, and you have to hear the entire Megillah, or you did not fulfill a mitzvah at all. So if somebody doesn't hear the whole Kriyat Torah on Shabbat, he hears most of the words. You can't say it's nothing. But on Purim, if you didn't hear the Ganze Megillah, you're wasting your time. You actually need to be there from the very beginning. So Purim is, yes, it's a reading like any other reading, but it's that much more so. Let's talk about the other mitzvot. The mitzvot of matanot le'evyonim, giving tzedakah. Jewish people have been giving tzedakah ever since when? We're the most charitable people per capita on the planet, the face of planet Earth. I know for a fact that I heard this from somebody who worked for the IRS. So I don't know how it is in Canada, but I would imagine it's the same. He said that they look at tax, like if they see like a lot of tax receipts or amount of charity being given, if they know that the person is Jewish, they have less suspicions. They actually believe that he's giving charity. It's like a thing they know. Call it profiling, whatever, call it whatever you want. The fact is, it's known that Jewish people have always been charitable. Even the Medrash says, "Ani yashein v'libi er." I'm sleeping for Yiddishkeit, but my heart is awake for tzedakah. It's like the last thing people do is stop giving. We're a giving people. So we always give tzedakah. Yeah, but a whole year, you don't have to do any investigation. You have to find an actual poor person. On Purim, you have to actually find a poor person. Just giving is not good enough. Your giving has to be earmarked in a very unique way. So you have to look for a need. Typically, a whole year, if somebody asks you to give, you don't have to go out of your way to find somebody to give. On Purim, you have to go out of your way to find somebody to give. So it's tzedakah on the next level.
It doesn't matter if Jewish, non-Jewish.
It does. A fellow would have to give to a fellow Yid, but it's a fellow Yid has to be in a real poverty, in a real state of poverty. There's a terrible story. It's like, I hope it's a joke. They tell this poverty-stricken fellow came to town, and the next thing you knew, he was manhandled and locked in a closet somewhere. And they're giving him food. They put food through a hole in the way. He's locked up. He says, "What is going on over here? Crazy people abducted me." They said, "Listen, last year we didn't have a poor person for Purim, so we're keeping you prisoner for a couple of weeks. We'll let you out after Purim." It's probably a bad joke, but whatever. but this gives you, like, it illustrates how Purim is different. And then, like, so why do we give it these gifts of food stuff? We give the gifts of food. So on a literal level, we give the gift of food because we want to make sure that everybody has Sudat Purim. Okay, but the Manas Halevi explains that there's much more, and others explain also. They say that the idea, Michael David's saying the camera's out of focus. As long as you can still hear me, we're good. Can you hear me? There needs to be an eye on. I don't know. I didn't change anything. You hear me? Fine. So he says, what's the mitzvah of giving gifts? He says it's in order to create brotherhood. It's in order to nurture a sense of closeness amongst people. And this is, when you give somebody a gift, nice basket, and it's wrapped up, and it's cellophane, and people, it's a nice feeling. It's a nice feeling to get mishloach manot. Now, the truth is, this is the mitzvah of Ahavat Yisrael. You're always supposed to go out of your way to nurture better relationships with the fellow Yid. And the Rambam says that a person should give compliments. He said that's the definition of Ahavat Yisrael. We should be mishabchay, maforei. You're so fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you did this. It's all about nurturing, building these relationships. Yes, but you don't have to go out of your way and look for it. So this is what we call Ahavat Yisrael on steroids. It's like taken to the next level. So this is the idea of Purim. We're taking everything we did till now, and we're doing it with much greater profundity. And finally, the meal, of course, we know the meal is really off the chart. There's no other situation where we say you have to drink until you run to the table. But that's what it says about Purim. Now, I advise you to go watch my video called Getting Wasted on Purim, and you can find that if you actually have to get wasted or not get wasted or how much you have to drink. But let's just say the idea of that a person is chayim adav libsumi b'puria ad yoda is something that doesn't exist by any other celebration in the entirety of the Jewish calendar. So basically, the Rebbe says, if you look at the four mitzvahs of Purim, it's something we've always done, but in a totally different way. So Purim is like, what MSG used to be to food. It's like steroids are for the erstwhile athletes who wanted to win the contest, but didn't mind taking a couple of body-altering drugs. It adds a tremendous flavor and depth, and it elevates everything. This is the idea of what Purim is. And this is what they accepted upon themselves. They accepted upon themselves liyot osim. They said, we're going to make this day something out of this world. And so we're going to make it unique, and make it special. And it's going to be exactly so it is written, and so it shall be done, and it will be done in its proper time, and it will be done b'chol shana v'shana. This is something that we will continue to do year after year after year, and we're always going to stick to it. And in this way, the Rebbe says that there's something we can also explain in a different Sikha. The Rebbe said we can explain the famous words of the Gemara that says, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. When Adar arrives, that we should increase in our joy. Okay, it's a Gemara Masechet Tanit on page 29. And Rashi says Mishenichnas Adam Marben Besimcha. Rashi says, Yemei Nisim Hayu Yisrael. These were days of miracles for the Jewish people, Purim and Pesach. But Purim and Pesach is in Nisan. So Rashi seems to be saying, we increase the joy and we keep it going all the way till after Nisan, as if there's some kind of continuation from Pesach. So the Rebbe in Tafshin and Aleph said, it's an edited Sikha, a marvelous long thesis, but I'm trying to share it in a very synoptic fashion. The Rebbe said that there was something incomplete until Purim came along. Why? Pesach is Yetziah Mitzrayim. We leave Egypt. But when we leave Egypt, we run from Egypt because we're afraid if we stick around, we're going to sink into the quagmire of slavery. And we're not going to be able to extricate ourselves. We'll be in the 49th proverbial gate of impurity. And what about the Pharaoh? Oh, he's crushed. What about Egypt? Egypt's gone. It's gone. We ran away, we escaped, it's all crushed. How about the time of Purim? So Purim, it says, we experience redemption, yet, achate avde Achashverosh. We're still, so to speak, under the thumb of Achashverosh. And Achashverosh became our friend. And Haman's house became, as I mentioned earlier, a yeshiva. In other words, we're seeing the concept not only of crushing of evil, but transformation, sublimation. What begins on Pesach ends on Purim. Because the Yetziah Mitzrayim, the leaving of Egypt, was not simply a statement of freedom or emancipation. Moshe Rabbeinu never says, let my people go. He says, Shalach Ami v'ya'avduni. Let them go forth to serve me. As Hashem introduced himself to Moshe Rabbeinu at the burning bush, he said, B'hotziecha es ha'am miMitzrayim, and I will take the nation out of Egypt, tavdon es ha'alekim b'harazeh. That's when they will serve God at this mountain. Yitzi's pointing out that Haman was killed in the month of Nisan. Yes, but that's not the meaning of what it says, because Rashi says very clearly, Purim and Pesach. It doesn't say Purim. Purim and Pesach is not it's Pesach, the emphasis of Pesach. So, I lost my train of thought. Where were we? The idea of going out of Mitzrayim is not just freedom. Freedom in and of itself has no value. It's the freedom to serve Hashem. It's the freedom to live a life of meaning, mission, and purpose. That's what it's about. So Yetziah Mitzrayim is the beginning of a process. We don't have a day of the month when we officially celebrate Shavuot. Shavuot is simply celebrated on the 50th day after Pesach. We count 49 days, and then whenever Pesach is, and in today's day and age the calendar is kind of set in stone, but once upon a time it wasn't. So in theory, Shavuot could have been the 4th day, could have been the 5th day, could have been the 6th day. Pardon me, the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th. It could have been different days. The point then is that what begins on Pesach with escaping from Egypt and having to run away from that, and the idea of being able to go to receive the Torah, but even when we receive the Torah, then it's not clear. Are we in? Are we really in? Have we bought in all the way? Did we really want this? Or maybe kind of there was a little bit of external pressure that was added. The picture gets completed at the time of Purim. So what begins on Pesach ends on Purim. And that's why we're going into this beautiful period now of the month of Adar, and the month of Nisan, holiday of Purim, the holiday of Pesach. This is the celebration of our Jewishness in its fullest sense. And this is what we call coming full circle. And this is what Purim represents. And this is why Purim is so important. And if you heard me screaming and yelling that everybody should celebrate Purim, this is why. It's big. Purim is big. Whether it comes on Friday or on Thursday or on Sunday, Purim is big. And the Jewish people, our ancestors, accepted it upon themselves for you and for me and whoever will join our people forever. B'chol shana v'shana, year after year, Jewish people will continue to rally around Purim. Invariably, Jewish people are uplifted and inspired by Purim, and Purim is a catalyst for continued positive change. Kadosh Baruch Hu should help us that as we prepare for our celebration of Purim, and not only just commemoration of miracles, but commemorating coming into the fruition and maturation of our Jewishness, that we should be zeicha for the end of the story, because the real end of the story is when Mashiach finally comes. May that be b'mheira, will be amenu speedily and in our days. Thank you for joining. Thank all of you. I appreciate you joining online. Please like, please share, please subscribe, And I look forward to continuing to share Hashem's Torah together. And hopefully soon Mashiach will be teaching us all Torah. Even when Mashiach will come, it says, the book of Esther will still be studied. So these videos will still be useful for somebody. And as I said, I look forward to continuing to share Torah's messages and to become uplifted together. Laila Tov, thank you.